Hello and welcome back to Wessex Watch. Today I'm going to share the results of a project I've had in work for nearly a year, with a conclusion that I'm excited to share with you. Join me as I describe a contest to determine the best diver watch for diving from a group of 7 contenders. In addition to being a student of horology, I'm a recreational scuba diver. I'm a bit old school. While the norm today is to wear your dive computer on your wrist, I've stuck with the computer and pressure gauge dangling from my primary regulator. Doing so keeps my left wrist free for a dive watch, and while the computer is the primary dive companion from an instrumentation perspective, I frequently glance at my watch to see time elapsed and to do safety stops. I admit I'm a bit of a dinosaur in this regard, but my passion for horology causes me to make room for a traditional dive watch as part of my dive gear. And to be honest, when I first learned to dive, the dive gear included a dive watch, tank pressure gauge, and dive tables. No computers. Just to dispel a few assumptions people might be forming, I'm not a professional diver. I've logged only 200 dives to date. Thus, I'm not a novice and I'm not a professional. I fit squarely in the recreational diver domain. So how did I come up with these specific references for the comparison? The answer is a combination of factors. First, I owned several of the references already, before the genesis of conducting the comparison test and video. Once I got rolling with the comparison video idea, I realized I was missing a few needed contenders. I wasn't sure how I could credibly conduct this type of testing without some kind of an Omega dive watch being included. So I added the new and very tool-like Seamaster Diver 300M to the group. Then I realized in addition to black, blue, and orange dials, I should include a white dial diver, and thus the Christopher Ward Trident 300 was added. All of these references are primarily tool watches, either with stainless steel or titanium, with no precious metals to be found. Some have a date complication, which is pretty useless from a diving perspective, so I'll not be discussing anything about that. Notably, I'm missing the big granddaddy of them all, a Blancpain 50 fathoms. I would have also liked to have included the Glashütte Original CQ diver and even the new Grand Seiko Spring Drive Ushio UFA diver, but I had to draw the line somewhere, and who knows, maybe I'll do another video with those references included against the winner and runner-up from this video. I should also mention that I had access to a few other divers that were not included in the comparison effort. The Pelagos 39mm in titanium is a solid dive watch, but I decided to keep the case sizes in the range of 40 to 42mm, so it got left behind. I also have a couple of quartz divers from Seiko and Tissot, but these were also a bit smaller and didn't meet the 40mm threshold. So here are the contenders in no particular order. First up, we do have the Omega Seamaster Diver 300M, reference 210.32.43.20.01.03, with a design epoch of 2025. We do have the Rolex Submariner, reference 124060, the current 41mm model in the Rolex catalog. We do have the IWC Aquatimer, reference IW328802, which is perhaps the most dated design of the bunch, but features the latest in-house caliber 32111 movement, with that nice bit of power reserve. We do have the Christopher Ward Trident Pro 300 40mm version, reference C60-40ADA31S0KW1-B0. We do have the Christopher Ward C60 Trident Lumiere Green 15, the recently released watch resulting from the collaboration of Christopher Ward with Adrian Barker of Bark & Jack. We do have the Breitling Superocean Kelly Slater edition, reference A1737-51A101S1, although with the green rubber strap replaced with orange to match the dial color. And we do have the Tudor Pelagos 42mm in titanium, reference M25600TB. My best friend is Greek, and I'm going with his pronunciation of Pelagos, the Greek word meaning open sea. To make the comparison as impartial as possible, I've created 2 scoring categories with criteria within each. The first scoring category is during diving, where I scored fit over wetsuit, bezel operability, underwater visibility during day and night diving, ease of safety stop timing, and reliability. To make the scoring easier, I awarded each category with either an excellent, good, average, or poor following dives with that reference. After I returned home, I normalized these into numeric scores. The second scoring category is beyond diving, where I scored timekeeping, ease of use, wrist fit, and loom performance. Each of these categories was scored on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being perfection and 1 being dog poo. Through the scoring process, I could put to rest questions like, what does each dial or hand color mean for readability underwater? Or, what loom application approach works best underwater at night? Let's get into it. The diving was conducted in the Philippines, at Tubataha Reef and around Anilao, both exceptionally great diving locations. The night diving was limited to Anilao, though. Each watch got taken on several dives to allow accurate scoring. For those unfamiliar with the mechanics of diving, you generally, unless shore diving, take a small boat to a given location and then back roll into the water to start your dive. Either just prior to the roll or immediately after entering the water, you adjust your timing bezel to mark your start of the dive, assuming you're using a dive watch. This bezel setting operation is done with wet and or gloved hands. Once the bezel is set, you begin your descent, and you can enjoy the dive with an occasional glance at your wrist to assess elapsed time. For single-tank recreational dives, you generally spend about an hour underwater, sometimes more if the depths are shallow, or less if you've been operating at deeper depths or in strong currents. You ascend to complete your dive, and you do a mandatory 3-minute safety stop at 5 meters depth to ensure you safely release the excess nitrogen your body absorbed breathing under pressure, and thus reducing the risk of decompression sickness. This same dive scenario plays out 3 to 4 times a day, and is the same whether you're diving in daylight or at night. The joke is a dive trip is best described as eat, dive, sleep, repeated over and over. Now let's look at how each of the timepieces performed. The Omega Seamaster Diver 300M was a watch I had doubts about from the start. The bezel has smooth sides and in my case operated a bit stiffly. Because of this, I was worried how a wet-fingered or underwater twist of the bezel would work out. It turns out to have been fine, to my surprise, and I had no trouble operating the bezel across repeated dives. Even after exposure to silty salt water, it functioned perfectly well following a freshwater rinse. The only area where this specific reference scored lower was in the strap. For whatever reason, Omega sells this reference with either a rubber strap or the mesh bracelet, not the famously good Diver 300 bracelet with its range of adjustability. Neither of the offered strap or bracelet gave quick adjustment when switching from bare arms to a wetsuit. Adjusting a pin on the rubber strap's folding clasp was a bit fussy, especially when gearing up in a hurry. I ended up adjusting once for the fit over the wetsuit and didn't wear it elsewhere during the dive trip. The visibility during daytime or at night were excellent, with a fully loomed bezel with bright and bold numerals at 10-minute intervals really popping at night. The alternatively loomed minutes hand was a welcome addition that allowed rapid assessment of elapsed dive time at night. For during dive, I scored this as a 45 using the scale shown here. Next up is the Rolex Submariner, a watch I'd taken diving previously. It's also the most expensive reference I used in this comparison, with the latest model now being sold for £8,450. Ouch! But how did it perform? For starters, it struggled to stay put on my wetsuit. No other watch seemed to have this issue, but it was constantly migrating from wetsuit-covered wrist to my hand. Despite repeated adjustments with the quick adjust feature of the oyster lock clasp and the glide lock, even underwater, I couldn't get it to stop migrating without painfully squeezing my wrist. This on a watch I know very well and have worn for years. It was both annoying and distracting, but never a safety or security issue. The bezel articulation is truly best in class and operated like a dream on every dive. Unlike other watches in this comparison, there is no loom on the bezel, save for the triangle marker where you set your dive start time. In the daytime, this led to reduced ease of assessing length of a dive, and at night it was, well, downright difficult to assess elapsed time. You could do it, but there was no quick glance to say, oh, I've been down 47 minutes, better start watching gas supply and thinking about servicing. I spent many seconds trying to assess where I was from a duration perspective at night, time I'd rather be spending seeking out these marvels. So I'll make a general statement here about all dive watches. If you plan to dive at night, only consider watches with lume bezels. It will save you time and frustration and frankly be safer. Because of the unlumed bezel, using this for safety stop timing at night was also rated lower. In total, the Rolex scored a disappointing 27 from a during dive perspective. Next up is the IWC Aquatimer, a watch I had really high expectations of prior to diving with it. From a build quality perspective, it feels almost over-engineered and was right at home with high reliability dive kit. It's chunky, solid, and the rubber strap is truly the best in class, with a large pin and pinholes with raised areas to make fixing the strap really effortless. The unidirectional bezel is unique as the rotating element is internal and driven by a clutch mechanism at the 9 o'clock position. I was amazed that after the first dive and following the subsequent rinse in the rinse tank post-dive, the bezel got super hard to operate. In fact, nearly impossible to turn. That may have been partially my fault in that I didn't operate the bezel while it was in the rinse tank, but then again, none of the other watchers suffered this anomaly. With a great deal of effort, I was able to get the bezel moving again, and the resistive friction eventually lessened. But what a shocker! Salt water with silt from messing around on the bottom to position yourself for good photography is the norm in diving. So beware, should you take this reference underwater. Give it a rinse and spin of the bezel at the same time. The bezel was reasonably easy to read during daylight diving, although being numbered at 15, 30, and 45 made a bit more scrutiny necessary to assess elapsed time. The bezel really failed to impress at night, with only the 15 numeral being lumed. The time I care about the most is nearing the end of the dive and performing the 3-minute safety stop, so while the first 15 minutes are well lumed, that's the time I'm least likely to be checking elapsed dive time. The Christopher Ward Green 15 also has this prominent first 15 minutes loomed differently, but it isn't really helpful for diving. Thus, similar to the Rolex, figuring out elapsed time near the end of a typically hour-long dive is way harder at night than it should be. This watch scored 30 for during dive as a result. Next up is the Christopher Ward Trident Pro 300 with white dial. This watch was the most affordable reference of the lot, available for £960 on the bracelet. I wanted a white dialed option to see how the legibility compared underwater, and what I found was the color mattered less than the visibility of the hour hand interacting with the bezel markers. Since this hour hand was rather thin, I think it actually detracted from legibility a bit hovering over a white dial. And speaking of the bezel, I really appreciated the minute numerals at 5-minute intervals and being loomed. This made quick assessment of elapsed dive time a snap and really was helpful. Unfortunately, the bezel is rather thin, meaning the numerals are rather small and thus slightly less readable. The bracelet had a bit of adjustability, enough for a 3mm wetsuit, but would probably struggle on a 7mm suit. I wouldn't expect a 1,000-pound watch to have a top-of-the-line bracelet, as is the case here. I really think the 42mm version would help this and notch up a slightly higher score overall, and wished I had that one for this comparison. Maybe next time. The night diving legibility was good, with a lume bezel in those 5-minute increments on the bezel numerals. If only the hour hand was a bit more pronounced and the bezel a bit wider. Overall, this watch scored above several others costing much more and would be a good pick for someone on a tighter budget when considering this collection. I scored it 42 for the during dive comparison, a really strong showing overall. Next up is another offering from Christopher Ward. It's the C60 Trident Lumiere collaboration with Adrian Barker. I was excited to try this watch out as the lumen dial layout looked really spectacular. Plus, I'm a fan of Adrian's work and generally agree with his thoughts on watches, so why not? I made a conscious decision to use this watch on the supplied bark and jack strap and didn't even bring the titanium bracelet along. That decision ended up impacting the scoring a bit, as I'll explain. The strap construction and materials are top-notch without question. It was comfortable when fitted. My only complaint was the size of the strap holes versus the pin. If you look here, you can see aligning the pin and getting it through the small holes could be a challenge, especially gearing up on a swaying dive deck. The IWC Aquatimer was the ultimate in strap ergonomics. with its large flat pin and strap design with large rectangular holes and a ridge of rubber around each. It made it finding and fixing the pin to the strap a breeze. I had to fuss with the bark and jack strap more than I cared to, which led to a lower score. But once on the wrist, it worked great. Everything else scored good to excellent, with a loomed bezel and contrasting loomed color on the minute hand. As mentioned earlier, the green 15 alternative loom color for the first 15 minutes was attractive, but irrelevant to assessing a lapse dive time closer to the end of a dive, typically 1 hour. This watch scored an impressive 45 for the during dive comparison. It would have scored higher if I'd stuck with the included titanium bracelet. Next up, we have the Breitling Superocean Kelly Slater edition. And yes, the watch was originally supplied with a green rubber strap, but I wanted the orange strap to match the dial, hence the look you see here. The strap does feature a folding clasp with 15mm adjustability, allowing it to size over various wetsuit thicknesses. My partner dives with a 36mm Superocean with orange dial, so I've seen it in action before. The bezel is narrow and only marked every 15 minutes. The minute's hand is unique with its block and stick layout, and there is great contrast over the dial itself. The minute hand gives an accurate accounting of elapsed time, so no issues there. Interestingly, orange is the second color to disappear at depth, after red. When at 30 meters depth, the dial was essentially gray in color. So the promise of greater contrast doesn't really hold beyond about 20 meters. Overall, I'd say the orange dial is really not superior to any other color with contrasting hands and dial. Where the watch falls entirely short is night diving, with no loom on the bezel and only the loom dot reference to the start of the dive. Like the Submariner, I'd not recommend this model if your diving schedule includes night dives. I think of this more as a surfing watch than a diver, so the endorsement by Mr. Slater seems to make sense. I scored this reference at a 30 for the during diving comparison. Finally, we have the Tudor Pelagos 42mm reference M25600TB. It turns out the best was indeed saved for last. This is a very tool-like dive watch and is all about function. Everything about this watch seemed to match the needs of the diver to a T. The bezel and titanium bracelet are really outstanding, with a clasp featuring the best ergonomics of the lot. With its spring tensioned adjustability, fitting over any wetsuit is doable and with comfort. If you had a more extreme exposure protection setup to deal with, the fold-out extension gives you even more fit options. I don't need that for fitting over a 3mm wetsuit, but it's good to know it's there if you need it. Even with its titanium case, this watch still had heft and presence on the wrist. I thought the blue dial and bezel were extremely well suited to contrast with the white hands. I also appreciated the wide bezel ring and very legible markers at 10-minute intervals. Diving with a watch in daylight or night yielded no complaints. While I might have appreciated a different loom color for the minute's hand, like the Omega or Green 15, it's a minor nit for an otherwise excellent dive companion. Not surprisingly, this watch scored highest of the 7, coming in at 54 for the during diving comparison. That's 9 points above the second place finishers, the Omega and the Christopher Ward C60 Lumiere. Here's a summary of the scoring results with the winning total highlighted. I went back and rescored the watches assuming a person had no interest in ever night diving but still wanted a great diving companion. Doing so resulted in the Tudor retaining the top spot by 9 points. You really can't go wrong with that choice. With the dive experience now reviewed and scored, I moved on to Beyond Diving, where I scored timekeeping, ease of use, wrist fit, and loom performance. These are also a bit subjective and your mileage may vary, but I scored the Omega Seamaster highest across these categories, followed by the Submariner, and then the two Christopher Wards and Pelagos. I'm not going to spend as much time talking this subject because others have covered each of these watches in detail from a desk diving perspective. I contemplated scoring an even more subjective category titled Aesthetics, with things like style and heritage, but here you'd just be getting an opinion without any facts supporting the conclusion. Diving allows you to see things that are so alien to our surface existence. I'm very fortunate to have had the opportunity to experience it and share a few highlights with you. While the intersection of horology and scuba is really an artifact of the past, with computers doing all the heavy lifting today and making the diving experience safer and simpler, I'll continue to stick with my old school tethered computer and a mechanical timepiece on my wrist, and occasionally admire at the mechanical wonder as I marvel at the beauty and variety of undersea life. Thanks for watching, and take care.